Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that the investment world isn't that pretty anymore, right? Bitcoin has come down quite a bit. Now the US equities follow as well because everybody is so uncertain what's going to happen with global trade. But I think that most people are not adapting to this situation. Most people wonder, should I buy the dip in this asset? Should I buy that thing that's now on a discount? But when the overall macro is bearish, shouldn't we, instead of trying to find the best asset, maybe get the worst asset and then bet on falling prices of that asset? Because here's the reality of the situation. Bitcoin from its top in January to today lost more than 25%. The Nasdaq 100 topped in February and it went down by 17%. And in the last year, the vast majority of altcoins lost as well. Now what lost the most? That's over here. It's WorldCoin, down 89% among the top 100 cryptocurrencies. From the top in March of 2024 to today, it's down even 94%. And so yeah, I disagree with the notion that most people have that buying low during times like this makes sense. Because yes, in the past we did see our rallies in WorldCoin, but does it really make sense to buy for 70 cents? Check this out. This is WorldCoin relative to Bitcoin. And while at the beginning the token was able to just trade in tandem with BTC, since March of last year it underperformed Bitcoin by 95%. And now this underperformance is relatively constant. Now where does this come from? Why does a token relative to Bitcoin devalue that much over time? Of course, when Bitcoin goes up, then something like WorldCoin can go up as well in US dollars. But why does it tend to underperform Bitcoin that constantly? The answer is in charts like this. It's the expanding token supply. So when the token supply grows faster than the demand, then the price has to come down, right? Price is determined by demand and supply. In August of 2023, we still had less than 600 million WLD, and that has more than 5x'd since then. And it's going to continue to grow. And so instead of trying to find one winner in a market that tends to do very poorly, it's much easier, I believe, to bet on falling prices of the worst tokens. Most tokens tend to underperform Bitcoin now, and most tokens even go down in US dollars now because Bitcoin also trends downward. Bitcoin is below its best moving average, the 120-day SMA. I've made a backtest on Bitcoin. I tried to figure out what's the best moving average to trade. So whenever we are above, I tend to be long. Whenever we are below, I tend to be short. And currently we are below. And we did see much more volatility in the past. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to see a repetition of history and we're going all the way down to 27K, but it's at least interesting to know how bad the past had been. If your wealth gets completely crushed just because Bitcoin now falls maybe to 50K or 40K, then I think you're probably overexposed. Then I think you should consider diversifying, maybe buy some gold, maybe hold some cash, maybe bet on falling prices. Because here's the reality of the situation. This is the average cost basis of the market. And nobody can say what the fair value of Bitcoin is. I think the fair value is whatever the market has as an anchor point. So when you buy into an asset, you always look at the current price relative to the price you bought it for, right? If you're currently up, say 3 or 4x on your Bitcoin holdings, you might consider selling some Bitcoin in order to maybe buy other assets or in order to just consume. But if you're currently in losses with your Bitcoin, you might just continue holding that Bitcoin until it recovers again. This is usually the mechanism. Thus, when the market as a whole is currently in losses, selling pressure tends to subside. We tend to see a bottom in a bear market. When you're currently above the realized price, it might make sense to sometimes take profit. And again, back to this chart. Since the realized price is the average cost basis of the market, this is what the average Bitcoin investor sees in their wallet. And currently, on average, Bitcoin investors are still in profit. They were in losses at the end of the bear market in 2018. They were in losses during the COVID crash, and they were in losses when FTX collapsed. But currently, the cost basis is still at roughly $44,000. It would not be surprising at all to see Bitcoin coming all the way down there again. And then a loss of 89% within 1 year will look pretty modest for the worst performing crypto. I think it is easier to identify losers than it is to identify winners. And that's because of two reasons. First of all, most altcoins tend to underperform Bitcoin most of the time, simply because the capital concentrates towards a few winners. But secondly, there seem to be very bad tokenomics, very bad conflicts of interest for most altcoins, because the supply is growing over time and because early investors and the team cashes out over time. That's why the average retail investor gets burned. And that's why we see charts like this. This is balancer relative to Bitcoin. A very constant underperformance, and does it make sense to just bet on falling prices of charts like this? Why take on too much risk trying to find the one winner and trying to buy WorldCoin at 70 cents when instead we can just make money when this continues to go down? It's always the same story. This is the balancer supply over time. It also continues to increase. And of course, that additional supply gets sold off over time. I've been talking about the betting on falling altcoins since Bitcoin hit 100K roughly, and that's why the community continues to make very nice gains. So this is by betting on falling altcoins. We don't have to try to fish for bottoms. We can just go with the general trend, and the general trend is bearish right now. The game really isn't that hard if we've got the macro on our side. Most people think it's too complicated to bet on falling prices or it's too risky, but I don't think so. If you know what you're doing, if you're using the right platforms, if you've got the proper risk management in place, then making money in a bear market is easier than making money in a bull market. That's why I've created more than 100 tutorial videos on the topic. Feel free to check it out. Because so many people have already lost money in this bear market, I've reduced the monthly rate as well from 165 to 125. There's also a 1-week money back guarantee. So in case you don't like premium, just message me within the first 7 days and I'll refund you 100%. There's really zero risk for you. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish here regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. Helps the channel grow. See you next time on YouTube or see you in premium. Cheers.